Right, so hello everyone, and welcome to Seneca's Fintech Firesides. My name is Professor Ishaan Srivastava. I'm faculty here at Seneca College, at Seneca Polytechnic. I am also the coordinator of Seneca Fintech. Our guest today is Oscar Roque, who is the VP and Head of Product at Interac. Now, he has a rather hefty bio, so give me a moment as I go through it. Oscar is a distinguished executive with expertise in strategy, product management, innovation, and emerging technology. He has successfully led large scale transformations, driving growth and operational excellence with a solid strategic foresight foundation. He helps organizations anticipate market trends and stay competitive. As the head of the Canadian digital ID business, Oscar leads Interac Verified, empowering Canadians to securely leverage digital identities for authentication and verification. Under his leadership, the business enhances security and fosters digital trust, with over 18 million Canadians choosing Interac Verified more than half a billion times annually. Oscar has led corporate strategy and innovation, guiding organizations through pivotal shifts and positioning them for long term success. His experience includes leading product management teams to deliver leading digital payment solutions such as Apple Pay. In addition to his professional roles, Oscar has also served as the board member for the Financial Data Exchange and advisory board member for IBM's blockchain platform. He is currently the chair of the Fintech Advisory Committee at Seneca Polytechnic. Known for his visionary leadership and commitment to social purpose, Oscar is dedicated to driving innovation, creating value, and advancing social good in an ever increasing digital world. Oscar, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Welcome.
Thanks, Ishaan and Sarah as well from the Seneca Fintech College. So just super happy to be here. Great. It's always such a long bio. Have to figure out how to shorten that thing. I'll tell my folks to do that. But yeah, just happy to share. And I think today for the next couple hours, I'm happy to answer some of the fireside chat questions, but also at the same time answer any questions that you may have. I think it's a fairly intimate group, so please don't hold back to ask some of those questions.
Absolutely. If you do have a question, folks, you can put them up on the chat. And once we're done with the main line of questioning, then we will go through your Q&As as well. So, Oscar, let's jump directly into it with the very first question. Could you describe your role as the VP and head of product for Interac Verified at Interac Corp?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we touched upon it a little bit at the bio, Ishaan, when you were going through it. But ultimately, what it is to be kind of the head of product for Interac Verified is I'm ultimately responsible for the P&L, right? So the revenue and the costs that make up in totality what the Interac Verified product line is at the end of the day. From a revenue perspective, these numbers are not out there, so I won't say specifically. Several dozens of millions are a part of my P&L in terms of revenue. But more importantly, around the value it delivers, we provide both authentication and verification services to over 18 million consumers. And that, like I mentioned, every day we have usage, right? So if you're logging in with a government website, if you're logging in with a bank to be able to open your account elsewhere, those are typically our services that it runs through. And as you mentioned in the intro, we have about a 500 million transactions, so 500 million transactions a year, which is pretty sizable just given where authentication and verification is today. Just from a little bit more from a day-to-day perspective, I lead a direct product team that manages those suite of products, right? From the authentication line, if you will, and the verification line as well. And they're responsible for naturally the product management side of the business, but also responsible for innovating and advancing that product on a day-to-day basis. And ultimately delivering value, right, to that end user, that consumer, so that they can confidently participate in a digital economy. And then it's not about just product. It's about also the teams that deliver and enable and empower our product teams. And so my larger team is close to about 100, and it focuses on all facets of that delivery, if you will. Obviously, technology teams, operations teams, security teams, legal teams, privacy teams, risk teams, and the like, right? So it's a full gamut to make sure that product that Interac Verified ultimately is a holistic view.
Awesome. I understand prior to this role, you also led transformation at Interac. Now,
Yeah.
what exactly does transformation mean in the context of a fintech company like Interac?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ishan. Like when I think about transformation, and I think about it more broadly, but also as applies to my organization and all companies at the end of the day. All companies have gone through, are going through, and will continue to go through transformation. And what does that mean? Well, I think transformation has many different types of definitions, right? There is, for example, digital transformation. How do you get more to a digitized delivery through digital channels? Um, when I look at the transformation initiative that I led, it's more centered around an operating model transformation. And so, just to give you a little bit of context, is at Interac, our operating model, the ways we work, if you think about it that way, um, we did not we haven't refreshed it, and we were utilizing an operating model that was easily over a decade old. And you can imagine in this day and age, a decade is a quite long time given
Mhm,
how
mhm,
fast the market accelerates. So at the time, our CEO, in concert with our board through the corporate strategy activities, um, we found it very timely to be able to timely to have the need to refresh what our operating model would be, right? And that was about a year and a half ago. So at that time, he ended up forming the transformation office. I was appointed to lead that office. And our goal of transformation was really twofold. This goes back to the definitions of transformation. So first one was moving from a waterfall-based delivery model
mhm,
to an agile-based delivery model. So what type of value can you deliver on a 2-week basis, right? A sprint at a time, and that allows quick pivoting, right? And quick delivery and customer validation at the end of the day. And the second goal of transformation for me also meant, and for the organization, also meant refreshing that operating model, right? You'll hear typical terms from any of the management consulting firms, whether it's McKinsey, Bain, BCG, all around 7 by 7, 8 by 8. And what that basically means is how many layers in an organization and how many people across reporting to a manager if you are a manager, right? And so we actually also did that at the same time as we evolved the way we deliver, right? So we had 8 layers, and then we went down to 5 layers,
mhm,
right? And then we had a typical span of control. So the number of people reporting to a manager was about 3, and we went 6 across, right? So we didn't do
right.
exactly a good term like 6 by 6. It was 6 by 5 at the end of the day for
Mm,
us. And what that really did for us was it increased our productivity measure and our targets so that we didn't have to change headcount. It wasn't about layoffs or anything like that. We kept our
mm.
costs very neutral, the same. And it was all about doing more with the same.
Right. So a horizontal reorganization in that sense.
Yeah, for sure. And a little bit of vertical as well, for sure.
All right.
And we actually had the opportunity during the transformation. Some folks said, hey, you know what? I've been in whatever department for so long, and I want to be able to express interest
Mhm,
and to join a fundamentally different department. And it actually allowed for those cross-functional moves,
right.
quite a number of them actually. And it's very interesting just to see folks who are in their groove and they love it, perfect, but also folks who are like, you know what, I'm about ready for change, and we don't have to lose them externally.
Mm.
We got to keep them internally and got to have a cross-functional move and support them obviously in their professional development.
So you certainly have seen a lot of change happening in the past 10 years.
Yeah,
What
for
key
sure.
trends, what key trends do you see shaping the future of fintech in Canada?
Yeah,
Particularly from
man.
your perspective and drag.
I was thinking about this the other day, and there's such a big list in my head. And at the risk of going over, whatever, how many minutes for this question, but also at the risk of, extending 2, 3 hours beyond the time we have. I'll just bucket up into three main things, right? Um, and then there's obviously stuff we can unpack there,
Mm,
whether it's through questions or questions from chat or questions later on. So the first one, and this is a given, especially given what happened in 2020, um, it's increasing levels of digitization, right? So stats have shown that whether it's 2020 to 2022 or 2021 to now, um, we are seeing more Canadians engage digitally, right? So those who are digital are engaging more digitally, and those who were previously not digital or more analog are also adopting digital services. And depending on the stat you look at, it's anywhere north of 40%, even north of 50%, from a baseline from 2020 to 2021. And that's pretty straightforward, I think, and well understood. The second key trend is kind of correlated from that, but also something that has gone on before that. Because of the increasing levels of digitization, it just opens up an easier path for fraudsters, right, to be able to fraud more and more folks,
Mhm.
right? And if you look at the CBA stats and the fraud losses just related to banking and consumers, it's estimated to be about $4 to $6 billion in losses here in Canada. And that's pretty significant. If you look globally, e-commerce losses from 2021 to 2022 has doubled, reaching $41 billion. And so that's the second key piece around more fraud opportunity for those malicious folks because of that increasing level of digitization. And then the third one that we're seeing is increasing amounts of regulation. And so while many may think regulation is a bad thing, it actually can be a good thing, to tell you the truth. And so, for example, when we think about regulation, it's all about, oh my gosh, how do you stifle innovation and all that stuff?
Mhm.
But think about it in this regard, where regulation and the more recent ones has been all around consumer protection and privacy, and more specifically around data, right? To ensure that, you're reducing the amount of data breaches. Canada's reducing the amount of data breaches, and to ensure all that data is protected, and all of us consumers have a proper and informed consent model, where that we can opt in to be able to share the data, and then we can also opt out, but ultimately effectively manage the data, right? So you're seeing things not only from the FedGov, which is all about like consumer directed banking and even bills like C-27. You're also seeing a big movement from the provincial governments. For example, in Quebec, they're always leading the charge here, and it's Law 25, right, which is all about privacy requirements that businesses must adhere to protect that data. So again, as I mentioned, like these are three big buckets, rather long of an answer, but this is how I'd summarize it in just a changing landscape. And it's all about making sure that any business that you're in, the job that you're working in, you're focused on that, but you're ultimately focused on what does it mean for the end consumer, and
Mhm.
from a product lens perspective, how do you make sure there's a product market fit, and also how do you tie things together, if I didn't mention it, to other emerging technologies like AI,
Mhm.
right, and it's all its applications, or like blockchain and all its applications, etc. Right, so three big buckets, but ultimately not in isolation of anything else.
Mhm. Now, it makes absolute sense. Ever since the advent of COVID, we have seen an absolute spurt in digitalization and innovation, and that naturally has led to the consequence of increasing fraud, which then causes governments to come in and increase regulation to clamp down on such fraud. Now, the question
Right.
is, how does Interac approach such innovation while trying to maintain the balance between security and trust?
Yeah, it's man, it's hard. It's
Mm,
always a fine balance, right? Because there is security and trust, and there's innovation typically. And anytime you read it, it's a kind of like juxtapose, right? It's like about having the best user experience, but how do you make sure it's secure and trusted? And at the end of the day, sometimes too good of a user experience makes you think like it's not secure, right? So
mhm,
same thing in this question around like, innovation and security and trust. So it's always, to me, and to my organization, a fine balance. And it's important to keep it balanced, right? So don't over index on one or the other. Um, and so in this day and age, as I mentioned earlier on, consumer protections, privacy, security, all of those are fundamentally important. My view is there's actually no innovation or no adoption of leading edge products without consumers actually trusting your company with privacy and security. These
mm,
things go hand in hand. Okay. Um, and so, as one of the most trusted brands in Canada, um, we're in a fortunate position. We're in a privileged position to actually have that trust. And so we take this very seriously. at the end of the day. And so every time we go through any product launches, our innovation processes, we're quite diligent to ensure that all our stakeholders, whether it's external customers like banks, like the consumers, internal stakeholders like private security groups, everyone's involved to be able to appropriately phase when innovation happens, take a risk-based approach. So you're not going to full kit and caboodle. You're making sure that you're proportionate to where you are in that stage, whether it's conceiving an idea, proof of concept, minimum viable product, and even full commercialization. You start getting more and more entrenched into those privacy and security areas as you get closer to that commercialization. And then again, the due diligence is super important as you go through it, and just making sure you're always looking around the corner and always keeping aware of, yes, market trends, but equally so, all those regulatory trends.
So we understood from an Interact perspective exactly what's happening. Now, from your personal perspectives, the question I want to ask you is, what does fintech mean to you, to Oscar Roque?
Yeah, to me, there's many different definitions of what fintech means. Um, I just like to take the simple definition to tell you the truth. It's any company that ultimately provides technology to deliver financial services to that end user, to the consumer,
Hmm.
right? It's all about that customer centricity, that consumer centricity, if you will. It's all about what you deliver, how you deliver it, the value that you deliver. It's not about the ones and zeros. It's about the customer, that journey that they're going through at the very heart and center of it.
So customer centricity is the key.
Yes.
All right. So with fintech companies today, what would you consider the biggest challenges that they face, and how exactly do you think they can overcome them?
Yeah. And so kind of outside of those three buckets, which are any challenge is an opportunity, naturally so, right? So when I think about the biggest challenge of today, if you will, the thing that's staring you down on a day-to-day basis, it's kind of the elephant in the room, to tell you the
Hmm.
truth. Like, and what the elephant is, it's the economy is just generally hesitant, right? We all know from a business perspective, from a leadership perspective, what we need to do, right? We all have our respective vision, strategy, roadmap, and all of that good stuff. We know how to advance our respective businesses to deliver that value ultimately to the consumers. But again, to no surprise, just given the volatility, if you will, of the economy, it's ending up to be a little bit of a wait and see approach, right? And that's understandable because organizations are naturally taking that risk-based approach because they don't want to go too far ahead, over-invest or over-index when the market is not yet ready for that, which then, if they do that, it puts their organization and ultimately, more importantly, their employees at risk, undue risk, right? So there's a kind of a responsibility from a leadership perspective to not put, the workforce at risk by going too far ahead. But in reality, despite all that, and what we're seeing over the last year or two, I am seeing over the last couple of months, seeing and hearing, it's starting to pick up speed, right? So acceleration in fintech, more innovation, um, more forward thinking, or the execution of that, not necessarily the creation of the strategy, because that's kind of sitting there already. The engines are starting to rev more,
Hmm.
and that coupled with increasing consumer confidence, right? Can really start to build this momentum and help kind of sustain and help overcome that key challenge of wait and see or the hesitancy.
So we effectively have a snowball effect of innovation as it goes forth.
Yeah, the flywheel, the snowball. I
Mm,
hope. Yeah, I'm hopeful. It's obviously on a day-to-day perspective. If you look,
mm,
even if you look at stock markets in the Mag 7,
hmm.
you see this tremendous amount of like volatility. It's sometimes illogical, irrational, right? But that's what it is day to day. But then if you take a step back, maybe look week to week, maybe look month to month, you're starting to see the slope, right? Maybe the slope being even steeper and trending in the right direction.
Mm, mm. So talking about trends, DLTs, distributed ledger technologies, with its biggest implementation in blockchain, they have been evolving for quite a while. What do you
Yeah.
see? How do you see that evolution, and what role do you think it'll play in the future of digital payments, which is a largely growing sector?
Yeah. It's funny. I just talked about the stock market. So I'm long on blockchain. I've been in blockchain, oh gosh, for over 10 years now. Um, Following it, implementing it, and continuing to follow it. Um, and fundamentally, I do believe this technology has staying power. It will unlock a significant value for businesses and ultimately consumers. Um, because what I believe in blockchain is if any of you have read kind of the protocols and the standards just of any type of blockchain, um, it allows truly the digital exchange of value, right? And ideally, an open format that has no walled garden around it, right? And so that's the role I think it'll play to allow that open ecosystem, to allow, point to point, entity to entity exchange of value in just a fundamentally different way than we are seeing today. But like any emerging technology, and history always repeats itself in this regard, anytime there's a new technology, the internet is an example with many different internets that existed back in the 60s and 70s before consolidation happened. Even in mobile payments, something like Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay, we saw, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of different types of implementations and standards and specs. It's almost like a standards war. And
Mm,
you see that whether you want to talk about beta VHS,
mm,
HD, Blu-ray, there's always these standards war that exists.
mm,
And I think all technologies typically go through that phase, right? And hopefully it's not many different competing technologies, but sometimes it's hundreds,
mm.
right? And that phase to me is a key gate where um, we ultimately have to see a consolidation, right? The best standard is actually a spec that is heavily adopted, not the one that's declared a standard, right? Um, and those discussions, that consolidation has to occur because oftentimes it's kind of a red herring. It's like a blocker to itself, which is funny enough, right? Because, I know these folks are trying to move it forward, but at the same time, it causes a lot of just conversation and discussion that ends up slowing it down, right? And so, in order to help kind of clear that gate and have that role it'll play in, the digital exchange of value, we're either going to have that consolidation effect that has to happen, hopefully sooner rather than later, and or have that killer app, old school term scenario, right? And then ultimately, once you get that, it goes like wildfire.
I really like the example you gave of competing technologies like with Betamax and VHS or with
Yeah.
HD DVD and then Blu-ray. Um, what would be the competing technology for blockchain? I mean, we know blockchain, as innovative as it is not without its faults. So what could
Yeah.
be that competition?
It's a competition within itself,
Hmm.
right? Is it blockchain? Is it, sorry, blockchain? Is it Bitcoin? Is it Ethereum? The various forms of Ethereum? Is it
Hmm.
altcoins? Is it
Hmm.
a stable coin? Multiple stable coins? Is it CBDCs, etc.? I mean, and I'm not even, the list can go on. I can't
Hmm.
even name the full list. And there's stuff popping up left, right, and center, and stuff that's not legitimate,
Hmm.
frankly speaking, while others are trying to be legitimate.
Hmm.
And so that takes away, right? When we talk about trust and innovation, there's people who are actually trying to move it forward
Hmm.
for blockchain and its use cases, and there are folks who might be more about the short term than the long term.
Hmm. Trust and innovation, it's certainly a conundrum. I mean,
It
particularly
is.
when we talk about the topic of open banking in certain countries, India, China, Southern Africa, for example, and even Eastern Africa, we have a lot of instances of open banking actually working and integrating into the larger economy as a whole. Can you speak to the impact of open banking and its potential to reshape the financial services industry in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. Open banking, it's had many names actually. It's funny enough. Open banking, formerly known as like consumer directed finance, but now officially known as consumer directed banking, aka CDB.
Hmm.
Um, for those just don't know, I'll level set a little bit. It's ultimately a framework that allows consumers and small businesses, by their own choice, to securely transfer their financial data from one provider, like a bank, to another, like a smaller fintech, as an example. And then that framework has been in development for a couple years now, at least. And that kind of framework plus the path forward and next steps around, legislation and opting in and all that good stuff, it was released back in April 2024.
Hmm.
Okay. And then what are the impacts to kind of and its potential to reshape financial services in Canada? Um, I think the Department of Finance said it best, so I'll just, go through their list a little bit because it's pretty succinct. So I think there's about five of them in total. So the first thing it'll do is it'll ultimately empower Canadians to securely, right, thinking about privacy and security, access and share their financial data from one provider to another provider. So that's the first. The second one, it'll ensure that Canadians can do this and are not subject to fees, right? So it's effectively free and it's part of the service that they have or are provided from the financial services industry. Third, it's meant to protect that consumer data, right? And what does protection mean? It means to avoid, I guess, what some folks would call risky practices like screen scraping. And what screen scraping ultimately is, if folks don't know, it's basically you share your login and password with a third-party company that sometimes stores it, sometimes doesn't. And then they log in on your behalf to be able to then see the screen, but computer vision, if you will, and they're able to pull down or scrape that screen
Hmm.
with what's displayed, like your account number or your balance,
Hmm.
etc. Right? And about 9 million Canadians use it today. Right. So that's pretty sizable and the risk is out there.
Hmm.
And so that it helps protect against that. So that's the third one. The fourth one, it ensures that if there's any data breaches or any party at fault, they're liable for it. Right. Because today in the screen scraping world,
Hmm.
it's a little bit ambiguous on who takes kind of that ultimate responsibility.
Hmm.
Okay. Technically, many people would say the consumer does because they broke their T's and C's, but that's not a good position to be in as an end
Hmm.
consumer, as as all of us individually. And then I think the fifth and final one, um, it's all about back to, I guess, one of the key themes of today. It's all about being able to allow Canadians, consumers to actually have more innovative products, right? Because if there's this secure sharing of data, of the transference of data, you can imagine many of the smaller fintechs, the up and coming fintechs, imagine all of that data flowing securely and privately to them
Hmm.
and what they can do, right?
Hmm.
Like personal financial management, PFM, is
Hmm.
typically showing a dashboard and automatically paying and all that stuff. It's typically a use case that's described, but that's the first, not the last, and there are many more to come. And so it's all about that regulation driving innovation forward in a secure and
Hmm.
efficient manner, ultimately for um, companies to come up so that they can have value propositions, unique selling propositions to the end consumer, so
Hmm.
that we can all improve what we think about our finances and ultimately our financial goals and outcomes.
Hmm. Screen scraping sounds like a recipe for disaster. And if the first implementation, or at least the first few implementations of open banking in Canada involve screen scraping, wouldn't that have a negative impact on the future adoption rates?
Well, today screen scraping exists, and that's what open banking is trying to move away from. It's trying to
Hmm.
say no more screen scraping, stop it. So I haven't heard of any breaches of any screen scraping companies to date, and we have
Hmm.
them globally. There's some in Canada, some in the US, there's some globally, and they're doing what they do. That's okay. No breaches that I've heard, but like all it takes is one, and then all of a sudden, boom, like wildfire, open banking, secure sharing, don't have to share your login password at all
Hmm.
um, will probably take off,
Hmm.
right? So it's there's a risk reward situation right now happening, and but there's no alternative.
All
So if
right.
you want that type of service, you have to use screen scraping, and you have to wait for open banking to come.
All right. So the sum is that the fintech landscape is essentially becoming crowded with some legitimate options, with some illegitimate options. Risk is all over the place. How does Interac stay competitive in such an economy, with such
Yeah,
a
so
competitive landscape?
totally. I think I mentioned just a tad before again, being again a very trusted brand, very recognizable brand here in Canada, despite us being really B2B, but in reality, our marketing is kind of direct to consumer at times.
Hmm.
Um, we're very fortunate. We take the position very, very seriously, right? And we have that trusted mark, that trusted brand. Um, and in reality, we've been in operation for 40 years over now, and it's not an easy thing to build, first of all. It's hard to maintain, and it's very easy to break down, right? So we don't ever want to be in that latter bucket. It's all about building, maintaining, and continually to advance it. And that's where a huge emphasis for us is all about, yes, providing seamless, much better user experiences, working
Hmm.
directly with our customers who work with you, the consumers, to provide that very seamless user experience, if you will, the UX. But at the same time, and not at the cost of, at the same time, it's all about protecting that data, protecting that security to the fullest extent possible, right? To maintain that trusted position.
Hmm.
Um, and what if we go one level down on that, how do we think about staying competitive? All right. Staying competitive is about um, not sitting still, right? I always worry about the inertia of success, right? When you're successful, you're like, oh, let's just keep doing exactly what we do, stay at the velocity we're staying and not accelerating. I always worry about that,
Hmm.
right? And so it's all about preventing inertia and also accelerating no matter what your velocity is. Because frankly speaking, the market's always going to do that. And you have to keep pace with the market, if not sometimes outpace the
Hmm.
market. And so what does that mean for us? It means understanding who our customers are, who their customers, the consumers are here in Canada, but it's also understanding about keeping abreast of what's happening globally, what's happening in the world. Um, Very often, um, if something is successful in the world, Canada ends up adopting it or a tweaked version of it,
Hmm.
right? We often look to Europe, GDPR as an example. We often look to Australia, right? Their success in open banking, sometimes mobile payments are examples as well. And just making sure that we understand what's going on in those global markets, and then right sizing here in Canada. What's super important out of all of that is as we start to move forward and this whole agility, agile construct I mentioned earlier, it's all about anytime we're going through an emerging innovation or a new product feature set, we focus heavily on customer validation, right? We a sprint at a time, 2 weeks at a time. It's all about testing, learning, iterating,
Hmm.
right? And I think we've all heard this before. Um, we may all come up with solutions. We think it's the best, but sometimes the solution ends up becoming myopic, right? So it's
Hmm.
all about falling in love with like what problem are we trying to solve,
Hmm.
right? And don't fall in love necessarily with the solution because the solution is guaranteed to change
Hmm.
over time, whether it's the short, the mid, or the long. And grounding ourselves in that customer problem to solve for and how it changes over time is always a recipe for success.
Hmm.
Um, and then the last piece about our unique selling proposition and providing value and staying competitive is ultimately around we are naturally this glue, this interoperable layer between one party or set of parties and another,
Hmm.
right? And providing that glue, that interoperability, and also making sure we're managing the expectations, right? And making sure that again, customer centricity is always at the front and center of it, is super important, right? And so if we do that successfully, like we have done in the past, in addition to customer validation, iterating, that's how we continue to drive value and stay competitive ultimately in this market because it's very again, it's once you have a really good network effect, it's hard to keep it. But if you can keep it, you continue to be valuable, continue to deliver value because you are valuable in that position.
Hmm. In terms of leveraging emerging technologies, now you did mention that there is a balance between trying to keep a pace with the market as a whole, but maintaining your own trusted standard. Now, when we talk about things like AI or machine learning, how does Interact leverage these two?
Yeah. Um, so as many of you mentioned the word machine learning, interesting how, it's now called AI.
Hmm.
We've been using ML, gosh, for well over a decade, 2 decades now.
Hmm.
And how have we been using ML? Obviously to stop fraud, right? Whether it's in our debit product, whether it's in our e-transfer product that
Hmm.
many of you may know, or whether it's in Interac Verified. It's all about having that kind of like that self-learning algorithm, that machine learning algorithm to be able to say, hey, you know what? We're starting to detect or have early signals of fraud, and we need to advise who our stakeholders, our customers on both sides of the network, if you will,
Mm.
of what's happening so they can make the proper decision. Right. So that's how we're leveraging it today. And it's been going on for quite some time. If any of you have done any research around the fraud that exists for Interact's products, it's global leading. We're very, 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 very little relative to anything out there. Right. So that's been, again, a fortunate and trusted position that we have from a preventing fraud perspective. And then, AI, as we think about generative AI, obviously for us, we're pacing ourselves in the market. There's a lot of like hype around it right now, which is all warranted. And so we're looking at how to apply that type of AI into our product sets, working directly with our customers, the banks, the fintechs, the credit unions, the telcos, the healthcare systems, et cetera, to be able to say, hey, where do you see value? And for us, where can we help be that glue from one party to another, right? To put in AI. What's naturally a conversation when it comes to AI is the data that needs to be shared
Mhm.
and um, how are we training based on the data, based on the customer value proposition,
Mm.
right? So that is an ongoing conversation naturally for us as we think about a network effect and applying AI. It's a little bit slower from the get-go, to tell you the truth,
Mhm.
but that's one of the drawbacks of a scaled network. But one of the big positives is when we can launch it, it launches at scale. It launches to everyone.
Talking about the future of fintech, how do you envision the relationship between traditional banks and fintech companies evolving in the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah. That's interesting. Like, I think about the next 5, 10 years, and I think about the last 5, 10 years. And so 10 years ago, 2014, I was actually at a bank at the time. And
Hmm.
if we rewind back that far, and you actually go a little bit earlier than that to the early 2010s, right? Kind of off of the back of what happened in 2008 and the recession there, we saw this fintech boom, right? Because a lot of gaps were created when the banks kind of all, pulled back on, let's call it innovation or
Hmm.
leading edge products, if you will. And so we saw a boom of fintechs back in the early 2010s. And then quickly off of that boom of fintechs, the narrative was very much David versus Goliath. Oh my gosh, the fintechs are going to take over the world. They're going to scale like crazy and just
Mm.
like be the new. Um, I would say though that obviously didn't happen. Um, the narrative quickly changed in the early 2010s, and probably to the mid 2010s to it was all about partnership models,
Mm.
right? I think the incumbents, many of the banks realized, oh my gosh, yes, the fintechs are good at certain things. And then the fintechs also equally realized, oh my God, that's innovation. And the fintechs also realized, oh my gosh, the banks are really good at having credibility and having the trusted mark
Mm.
with our customers that we don't have yet because we're an unknown name, relatively speaking. And so that's why it became kind of a
Right.
partnership model. And so over the next 5 to 10 years, I actually see this getting better,
Mm.
right? Especially given, this whole hesitancy and hopefully it going away.
Right.
I see it getting better. I see it more strong partnerships happening. I actually see partner models happening. And what does that mean? It basically means we're thinking about only fintechs or financial services, but I think about what happens when you do partners, when you extend to the regulatory side, when you extend to healthcare, when you extend to telecommunications, you extend to retailers,
Mm.
CPG, et cetera. And so that's where I start to see it opening up more and a bigger appetite to be able to think of that broader ecosystem outside of what we're typically used to or competing against across the street.
Right. So instead of the original competitive relationship that was foreseen for these two entities, it developed to be more of a symbiotic or a cooperative relationship between them. Okay,
100%.
so with that in mind, what advice do you have for future fintech entrepreneurs about navigating regulation and building trust in their products?
Yeah, and that's kind of you summed it up well, Ishaan. Like it's all about like that symbiotic relationship, right? I think when you're typically launching a company or launching a product, you have to understand that like unless you have very deep coffers or deep backing, right, and
Hmm.
can really make a mark because of that, it's all about signing those one, two first deals and then building off that scale. It's all about partnership at the end
Hmm.
of the day to drive that forward, at least here in Canada,
Hmm.
right? And that's super important, just given the nature of our competitive dynamics here in Canada. So that's number one for sure, Sean, that you called out, and I agree
Hmm.
with. The second one is we've heard about the regulatory landscape throughout this whole conversation this morning. It's staying abreast of that, right? And understanding the opportunity set that comes with it, right? And you can't just say, oh my gosh, it's going to come down the pipe and I'm going to have to abide by it. No, I think it's important to be part of the conversation and partner with people
Hmm.
who are aligned with your values of whatever your company is trying to do, those principles, and be able to be part of the conversation, influence, right? The necessary stakeholders, the government, et cetera, as those regulations take shape, right? So make sure you're part of that and keeping track of it because it will fundamentally change the
Hmm.
nature of your business, one point or another, as it does with all the incumbents. And then the last bucket, in addition to those first two, would be about like just for any entrepreneur out there, you may be a known name or usually at times, a lesser known name or an unknown name, right? So it's all about trust. Be super laser focused on building it, partner with folks who have it. Um, and trust extends in or has two main areas that I would focus on. It's about your company, building, maintaining that trust. And it's also from an entrepreneur perspective, building your personal brand and what that means to have trust, right? Be super just diligent about it, protect it at all costs, and don't ever open up the opportunity for you to lose or for somebody else to kind of um, go against that trusted mark that you have from
Hmm.
a company and a personal perspective. Because again, it's hard to build it, but it's
Yeah.
even harder to rebuild it.
Yes.
You lost it.
Hard to build, easy to lose.
Yes.
Absolutely. So at Seneca FinTech, we try to instill an entrepreneurial perspective amongst our students because at the end of the day, the key to fintech innovation lies in the startup scene. Now, for the benefit of our students, what skills and experiences would you recommend for students aspiring to work in fintech or the digital transformation roles?
Um, ooh, that's a hard. Um, I would say lots is changing and it's only accelerating at an ever increasing pace. Um, and I think the the main thing I would focus on, excuse me, is truly be open to what is out there, um, aka be flexible,
Hmm.
right? There's a term that we use oftentimes in corporate strategy, and it's called VUCA, VUCA, and that stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, VUCA, right? Um, and that's how we describe the market. That's how we describe the changing landscape of business,
Hmm.
Canada, globally, etc. Right? Just in many regards, everything is just becoming increasingly complex and uncertain. Um, so with that said, going back to this whole openness and flexibility, you've got to be able to take that approach, and it also is synonymous with building resiliency. And just know
Hmm.
as you're taking that approach, and you're good, you want to aspiring to work in fintech, digital transformation, but even broader, um, just know that no one has actually figured it out. Because everybody's under the same VUCA, if you will,
Hmm.
and no one has that crystal ball. Um, and no one will, to tell you the truth at all. And just take that opportunity to be open, to be flexible, to always take that quote unquote growth mindset. What does that mean tactically though? Honestly, right? Because sometimes I'm speaking at the macro. For example, if you're looking for a role in any company and you're like, you know what, I'm looking at this role, it's kind of like 60, 70% defined. It's not exactly what I want it to be. Maybe it's not exactly from roles and responsibilities. It's not exactly from a company perspective. And so what I would say is just be open and flexible to do it because even though it's not 100% defined, if it does largely align to a majority set of roles and responsibilities, or you kind of like the company, or you can see yourself, aligning to that company's values.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very important. And the leader you'll be working for is, someone that you think you can work for sure, and you can align with. I think ultimately take that chance. Be open and flexible, take that chance. And frankly speaking, any role out there, you can evolve it and extend it, right? And also compress it where needed, to what you want it to be, whether it's something that you want to be an expert in, or whether it's something that you want more challenge or to learn about, right? And that's why the leader is important, to be able to interview that leader as much as they're interviewing you, and just make sure that that you have a runway that you can create, however long or however wide. It is a two-way street always, right? As you're thinking about work in fintech or digital transformation roles, right? And the last thing I would say about being open and flexible, and many of you are studying, is all about like, I can't stress enough I say this all the time to my team, and to others I'm mentoring. You get out of it what you put into it. In other words, homework always prevails. Due diligence always prevails. And it's the long game you're playing when you do homework and due diligence. And I'll tell you over and over again, some folks may be able to be awesome on the spot, and some folks may, they do homework, but they're not that great on the spot just because of just the very nature of it. But I will tell you, and I've seen this over many decades of my career, in that long game, the folks that always rise to the top are the folks that always can do the work because they've done the homework and put in the due diligence, and they're very well thought out. And once that flywheel starts going of that trunk of knowledge and the homework, it's super hard to stop the flywheel from going faster and faster, meaning you just accelerate way faster in the mid and long term. And the short is very short, frankly speaking, so you don't have to worry about that in the mid and long term. And it's a massive flywheel effect. So always do the homework, do the due diligence, and be open and flexible.
Competence above everything. Awesome. Great. A final question from me. Can you share any personal experiences that were pivotal in your career development in fintech?
Yeah, the personal experience is, a little bit on the theme of the last question. It's actually very on theme if I think about it. I haven't figured it out, to tell you the truth. And I don't know if I ever will, just given the market's changing. And I'm just being honest. And if you were to rewind 10 years, ask me the same question, it'd be the same answer. You rewind 20 years, ask me the same question, it'd be the same answer. And if you look at that, my profile for what it's worth, you'll see I've zigged and zagged quite a bit, right? What does that mean? And so more tactically, I wore a pager. So I manage server farms, I manage code that somebody else developed, and I wore a pager should anything go down, right? So I was troubleshooting that. I developed code. I went into sales, BD. I did project management, ran an office for a while. I did consulting. I did product management. I also did strategy, and I did transformation, right? And so there's a lot of zig and zagging and a lot of also different sectors I've worked in, right? And so that macro view or that meta view, from my experience, has really been pivotal to allowing me to just manage through that VUCA that I mentioned earlier. And ultimately, if I look back, and some of the roles were not good, I didn't enjoy them, but at least I did them once. to say, you know what, I have a list of what I don't want to do again, right? Versus what I exactly want to be when I grow up, right? And that's okay to have a list of don't want to do, tried it, don't want to do. And then you start to narrow out what you want to be when you
Mm,
grow up or what I want to be when I grow up.
mm,
And so that's really helped shape my profile, my experience set, and that allows lots of curveballs to be thrown at me, generally speaking, whether it's market, whether it's customer, or whether it's internal, right? And the last thing I'll say about this one is just when I think about that, and hopefully you've realized throughout this fireside chat, I go in and out of micro and macro quite a bit. Okay, it's also my scenario planning kind of background with strategy. Um, and so while it's important to very much do the homework, the due diligence, learn day to day and keep yourselves challenged and motivated to get up every day in the morning, have that work-life balance kind of after you're done your work. It's important to do that every single day and be engaged, right? 100%. Show up and do your best, do your homework. It's also equally important to understand the long game and take a step back, right? I always have this analogy where it's like we're all on the dance floor, right? We're all dancing with our own pocket of friends, and there's many pockets all around it, and there's whatever song is playing.
mm,
Choose your favorite genre,
mm,
right? And it's all about being able to, at times, and we all do this on the dance floor, if you will, go up to the balcony or step away from the dance floor and just look at the dance floor, right? And look at the pockets dancing on said dance floor and understand just like, oh, that's a group that does this, that's a group that looks funny, that's a group that's really good dancers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And look at what's going on from the meta perspective and just watch it, right? And understand the bigger picture of what's going on in terms of the macro environment. Right. And if you can have a keen eye on both being on the dance floor, enjoying yourself, but
mm,
also on the balcony and enjoying watching yourself, plus also understanding
mm,
others.
mm.
Uh, for me, that's been a big learning over time as I applied corporate strategy to my day-to-day world, and that's been super important and pivotal to my development and my track as
Mm.
a leader or as a person in fintech.
That was a great analogy of being both the participant and the observant at the same time. You mentioned that if I were to ask you that right now, you would say you're still trying to figure it out. A decade ago, still trying to figure it out. 2 decades, still trying to figure it out. Perhaps the key is to continue trying to figure it out. Now, of
Yeah,
course, there
sure.
will be no point in your career, especially in a field as dynamic as fintech, where you can afford to stagnate, where you can afford to stop growing. But the process will get incrementally better. Your competence, your skills, your abilities, your ability to handle new things and changes and problems, that will keep increasing. So
Yeah,
that was actually a very on point message. I loved it. Thank you so much, Oscar.
of course.
Now, let's jump on to the questions that have been put up in the chat. One person asked, how is AI ML being leveraged? We've already answered that.
Yeah.
The other question is, what role does data analytics play in your fintech solutions? And how do you ensure data security and privacy? And how does the team incorporate user feedback into the development of fintech products?
It's a good question.
Multi-parter there.
Yeah. I'll answer that. I think it's two parts. So thanks, Pooja, for asking that question. Data analytics play. So it's kind of akin to AI, ML. And so it's all about, being able to access that data securely, being able to leverage it, store it at times. And so it's a huge, huge part of our business where our data and analytics team, we have a whole group dedicated to this, is all about leveraging that data to be able to stop fraud, right? So apply the ML. It's actually the ML team, it's the data and analytics team equally so. And so that it's just it plays a big part, right, at the end of the day. And I see it playing a bigger part. And it's not necessarily only from a stopping fraud perspective, but
Mhm,
obviously it's going to be important from advancing opportunities, right? Getting more insights and customer perspective, right? So that's a big one on the data and analytics piece. And then the second part of your question around data security and privacy and how do we kind of incorporate that? That question all comes around to we have a we have a info security team, we have a privacy team, and we have a compliance team at the very least at Interac, right? And I would say anytime we think about a new feature function or any part of development as part of our product management lifecycle, um, we have always engaged those teams and more right from the onset, give them the fullest context, and so that they understand, okay, we're developing X, Y, and Z. How do we think about privacy by design, security by design, the compliance elements, etc. So that's ingrained right at the very core of our product.
Awesome. Uh, Question number two from Varun. How do fintechs more effectively rather, leverage fintech solutions to address the growing threat of data breaches?
Tech wins more effectively. I think it's just partnership at the end of the day, right? So each organization um, should understand, likely understands where their core competencies at. Not every organization, unless you're the Mag 7 and you've gone to that scale, but they all started out this way. They all understand what IP they own, right? What core competencies they have, what talent they can attract and retain. And ultimately, whether it's tech fin more effectively leveraging fintech solutions or fintech more effectively leveraging tech fins, it's all about the partnership, number one, right? So that's how they can effectively leverage that, strike more partnerships, and know that certain niche fintech solutions, right? You don't necessarily want to build because sometimes you've got bigger fish to fry. And these fintech solutions are good. And so I think that's super important. I think another angle of tech fins leveraging those fintech solutions or other smaller companies is those niches sometimes end up becoming the right algorithms or the right augmentation of AI ML
Mm-hmm.
to be able to provide a much more full picture on how you stop fraud, data breaches, or how you protect multi-layers of protection, whether it's preemptively, but also multi-layers of protection, post an occurrence.
All right. Next question is from Ebenezer. He is interested in knowing, in having knowledge and working with any fintech company. He holds a CFE and a postgrad cert in fraud examination forensic from Seneca. What courses would you recommend for him to work with so that he can get to work with a fintech company?
Um, what's when I think about this, I look at this like there's fraud, there's an expertise here that you've called out, right? And so I'm gonna go back to the original theme around depth is important, but also what's super important is breadth, right? And so you've sometimes heard maybe this T-shaped type of profile, right? So it sounds like, there's a depth in fraud, that forensic accounting, all of that good stuff. There's a lot of detailed work there. But I would ask, yourself and anybody going through this of like, okay, I've got an expertise in something, but where don't I have an expertise in? And
Mm,
where maybe can I just scratch the surface on so that I'm at least knowledgeable so that when a group of folks or leaders talk about it, I can just at least listen, understand what's going on, right? To be able to then translate it to what does it mean for me in my kind of line directly, right? So focus on trying to close some of those surface level gaps and
mm,
learning more about other areas is going to be important. Um, it's hard for me to say specifically which areas because I also like when I think about the way education is changing. When I went back, my schooling days is many decades ago, and the subjects, the little set of subjects that they used to teach is vastly different from the subjects today, right? So I can't even comment on that. It's all about just closing those kind of like um surface level gaps that you may
mm,
have and making sure that you can be in the flow and understand whether if they're talking about something like finance or they're talking about something like corporate strategy or they're talking about something like fintech solutions and the lending economy, at least just start to dabble in those so that it's important that you can start connecting the dots as you go deep into your line of work.
mm. So essentially, kind of mirroring what you were talking about, the organizational rearrangement, covering more bases horizontally as opposed to just delving into one thing very deeply.
Yeah. I think yes, absolutely, Sean. And if you look even kind of go on the balcony on this one, um, I didn't say this explicitly. Financial services is a huge vertical,
Hmm.
right? And if you were to pretend that's a person, right? Financial services, a huge vertical with a tremendous amount of depth, huge amount of depth. But then we all know it's not about just financial services for us as humans, as consumers. Um, there's health services, there's telecommunications, there's the packaged goods, or there's the retailing environment that we all kind of do on a day-to-day perspective. And so what's important is those multiple verticals, right? Or what's really important is not to verticalize it or focus on one vertical, is to understand the coalescence, right? Or that verticals are actually there to help us understand each and every single one. But it's important to understand like things are all coalescing into one big bucket.
Hmm.
It's all about breadth at the same time. And it's all about understanding that there's connectivity between each and every single one of verticals as we take a step back, right, to understanding the broader economy and the sectors. Not too different from us as an individual and us as learning subject matter areas.
Awesome. Uh, the final question we have is from Yi. Besides the network effect, what other competitive edges, risks, opportunities do you think are out there? Facial verification with login or credit cards, transactions, government endorsement. What came into my mind was two successful examples. One is Meta with volatility and ambiguity, plus working with the US government. The other is PLTR, who is currently the winner or leader of the US AI fintech public company. The biggest client is the CIA. That market sees government endorsement and therefore a big trust factor. What do you think about that?
This is a hard question. So when I think about AI and all of these companies, when I think about AI, and AI has the generative capability, obviously from a text, obviously from a video, from a photo, and all that perspective, right? So that's a good thing. But equally, so when I think about AI, it's also a bad thing if put in the wrong hands.
Hmm.
Right. So when I think about facial verification with that login, credit card transaction, government endorsement, right? At the end of the day, you're having machines fight machines, and may the best machine or algorithm work will win, which I hope is not the case because there's some fraudsters who are trying to make a buck out there at the same time, and they run it like a business, like other legitimate businesses. So back to the illegitimate versus legitimate
Mm.
construct that we talked about, Ishan. And so when I think about that, I think the risk and opportunity around the facial stuff, the AI stuff, is ultimately taking a step back, is how do we make sure that we know where things are real and things are not? How do we know the face is real? It's not AI generated. There's actually a person behind it. How do
Mm.
we know the information is real and it's not been modified or it's not misinformation,
The
disinformation?
proverbial Turing's test.
Yeah, that's it. And I think for any organization out there, um, maintaining the authenticity of who we are as individuals, and frankly speaking, our derivatives,
Mm.
right? So whether it's works of art, whether it's works of video, photo, whatever it is that's truly generated by us, that provenance, if you will, is going to be super important in the future. And equally so, we want to prove who we are, but we also want to prove that we're dealing with who we want to deal with on the other end of the table, that virtual table, if you will. And so I think the opportunity set there, but also the risk set is like we're only one brain at a time. And so how can we surround ourselves so that we are empowered to be able to deal with the right brain across the table or the right derivative of said brain, right, in a machine-based economy and an AI-based economy. And so that is going to be super important for us as we think about more and more AI opportunities unfolding, um, and proving stuff is original or we approved the derivative of our original versus everything is generated or not real and it's potentially angling towards a fraud vector.
Awesome. Okay, I think that is all for the questions from the. Yep, that's it. Okay, superb. So, Oscar, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and answering our very many questions. We do appreciate it a lot, and we can't wait to pick your brain another time on a few more specific topics. Everyone who joined in, thank you so much for joining in. Uh, we will have another session in 2 weeks' time. So, this session will be recorded. It'll be available on senecafintechfiresides.com. So if in case you missed it, you certainly can view it there. Otherwise, thank you so much. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.